Happy Valentine's Day! I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to create a fun Valentine's inspired colorway packed fill with love from me. I actually created these for little Valentine's Day kits that I sent out to people, and so I'll show more of what I included in there, including my handmade Valentines, at the end of the video. But let's jump in and talk about the planning. The colors that I combined from night 3 of Hanukkah, which maybe also was by Watermelon Colorway, but a combination of Pink Orchid and Poinsettia was so warm and beautiful. It really struck me. And I knew I wanted to combine those colors in some kind of way on a few different bases for this project. So we're gonna start off with a prototype on Knit Pick's Stroll fingering weight yarn that is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and we're gonna kettle dye it in the Pink Orchid to start as our base color. In my pot, I have 16 cups of water warming up. And now I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. Ordinarily, I might choose to start a kettle dyeing process cool, but since I plan to dye a lot more of this colorway, I'm not going to start with a cold pot with no acid each time, so I'm starting hot with acid. Okay, I am going to start with using 75 milliliters of a 1% stock solution of Pink Orchid. This dye isn't always the best in a stock solution. Sometimes it almost acts a little pearlescent. So I did try to shake it up as well as I could, but the bottle is a little full. So I expect we might end up with some variation of this pink color. Let's go ahead and give it a stir. It's looking really good right here. I did make the stock fresh for this project a couple days ago. Now I pre-soaked the yarn overnight, and we have 300 grams of, ooh, this color is looking great. We have 300 grams of yarn here, and this is soaking up the color so fast I couldn't even stir it in very much. We will have some lighter patches. I may decide that I want to split this up and do it in 2 layers because it soaked up the dye so fast. But this is why this is a prototype, because we have pretty much soaked up all of the color already. I am going to let this one be and leave those white patches, but that was really fast. And we are going to be dyeing another stage in another pan. But let's go ahead. I'm going to leave this in for a couple of minutes. I'll pop back in front of the camera and we'll do a version with the same amount of dye, but tweaking it a little bit. 75 milliliters of a 1% stock solution is 0.75 grams of dye. With 300 grams of yarn, that is a quarter of a gram, 0.25 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn, or a 0.25% depth of shade. And I calculated this as being approximately the same depth of shade I did with that Cool Vat back when I did Hanukkah, because I really liked that tone, and so I thought that would be a good starting point. The problem is that there's not that much dye, and so it soaked up so fast. So the way that I can get a little bit more coverage but still having a tonal yarn is by dividing the yarn in half. So for subsequent batches, and I'm going to be using some yarn bases that might absorb dye a little bit slower anyway, but what I'm going to do is I am going to measure out my 75 milliliters of dye, use approximately half of it for that first layer, remove the yarn, add the rest of the dye, stir it up, and then add the yarn back in. Maybe moving the zip ties, but there's a goal to layer it on, which will reduce the amount of variation, reduce the amount of white, but of course we're gonna be dyeing a second step, and so that will give more coverage as well. So I'm not mad at this. It's just, it absorbed really fast. Now, of course, this Stroll is our prototype. I wanted to play around and make sure I got the depth of the colors approximately what I wanted. But the 2 main bases that we're going to be dyeing today are W2D4's Shimmer fingering weight yarn, and this fun sparkle base is 90% superwash merino, 10% lurex, and so this may dye up fairly similarly to the Stroll. But then we're also gonna dye up some Capretta Superwash. This yarn is 80% Superwash Merino, 10% nylon, 10% cashmere. And I've shown comparisons that it does absorb colors a little bit slower than, for example, Stroll and potentially that shimmer. But I don't think I'm gonna dye them side by side in one pan, but we'll be using the same technique and compare the way the colorways end up at the end. Normally I would want to heat set things for at least 20 to 30 more minutes than what I've done here. But since we are going to be dyeing this in a second step, we will be applying enough heat to finish setting this color while we are there. And this means that the fact that this absorbed so quickly means that we're going to be able to reuse this dye pot pretty quickly. So I have measured out 75 milliliters of our dye again, but this time I'm only taking approximately half. I measured out the whole 75 milliliters and then just divided it roughly. I don't think it's very important to be exact because the more important thing is the total amount of color we're gonna add. And now we're gonna add 300 milliliters of shimmer fingering quickly to the pot. And I folded it in half first. The difference between the first round of dips and any subsequent ones is the main difference there is that it's cold when it starts this time, but the next time we will have acid in here, and you can see that this color has soaked up really, really quickly. So I am just gonna oh my goodness, I am actually not gonna let this sit very long. I am going to remove it now. So however many seconds this was in the pot. But you can see we do have a lot of pastel areas. And so my plan is to let it cool a little bit so I can move those zip ties around, and I'll show you that. But in the meantime, I'm going to take the rest of our dye and add it to the pot, rinsing out both containers. And let's hop over to the counter. Okay, it is still warm. Hopefully this won't melt the counter at all, but the goal is with each of our zip ties is to move it to one of the deepest sections, or at least we want a lightest section towards the bottom, because it's not so much that we are dip dyeing. That one had a lot of light. It's not so much that we're dip dyeing as it is that the dyes are absorbing as quickly as we can add this in. So now we still have some light at the top, but we have more of the pastel towards the bottom. So when we add it in this time, we should get more coverage. Or at the very least, we're gonna get more coverage potentially than if we had just done it in one step. Now, this time I have the tongs at the ready to help apply this color on. So we go in fast and lift it up, and we're gonna still have a lot of tonal variation in here, but this allows, even with going in quickly, to just have more coverage of the pink. And you can see it's mostly all absorbed. I'm gonna add everything in, wiggle it a little bit, and I'm gonna let this sit for about 5 minutes. But it's good to know that the colors are absorbing so quickly on this layer. I started soaking some of the Superwash MCN, but it's been a couple of minutes, and so let's remove this. And we absolutely still have tonal variation in here in our beautiful shiny Lurex-based yarn. It is just a little bit more subtle and less extreme than what we saw with the Stroll. Now, the other thing that's worth noting is we use the same amount of dye, but the tone feels different. I'm not sure how well it's picking up on camera, but I think that the coolness of the silver Lurex that is in the shimmer yarn here makes us feel a little bit more muted, a little bit almost more purple. And in the Stroll, the pink feels a little brighter, but also it could be because of where it was concentrated. But anyway, let's try the MCN. Now I'm gonna add about half of the dye, stir it up really well, because you want it well distributed. Again, we don't want a solid, but we do want reasonable coverage of our yarn. Squeezing out most of the dye. And the last time I folded the yarn in half, this time I'm not. I'm going in, but it didn't really go in all the way before I lifted it back up to move the yarn around. And now the cashmere content, oh goody, it's still soaking up the dye super fast, but it may be just a little bit slower than what we saw with our other bases. Just because in general things tend to spread a little bit more. Oh goody, I am still seeing some white. And I mean, it looks like there's not really much of anything left. All right, I'm gonna let this sit a minute, then we will remove it to dye the other round. All right, let's go ahead and remove this. It's okay if there happens to be a little bit of color left because we're gonna be putting it back in, but you can see that basically everything has absorbed. And then off camera, I'm gonna shift the zip ties like I did that first time. Because don't forget, our goal here is not to eliminate the pastel areas, but it's to just even things out a tiny bit. And for what it's worth, I think I only used about 1/3 of the dye in the first dip on this. So not quite half, but I have rinsed out those containers. And now we are coming in again, trying to move quickly in, but oof, starting with the whitest areas and lifting and lowering just to attempt to get some more coverage. And I do see a beautiful tonal base here, and I'm gonna leave this in for 5 minutes. It seems to be striking pretty quickly. Even though I know this base tends to be softer overall, I am pleased that it looks like I will be able to cycle through one pot to do the first layer of tonals pretty quickly, which means we can now go and start talking about the second step. Okay, I did label the zip ties of the Stroll because the Superwash MCN does look a lot like it, but I am again very, very happy with how this is going. And now again, finally, we will plan step 2. For our next stage, this is our Stroll prototype, and I am going to start with some of the lightest yarn at the surface just because I think that that makes sense. But our other colors on our other bases are a bit more even, so that shouldn't be as much of an issue. Now, I debated about what I wanted to do to layer on our next color. And right now I am adding 5 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar into our pan, and we might add a little bit more. But I debated between doing some speckles, between doing some resist. I was thinking about a lot of different things. And it's Valentine's Day. I decided I should keep it simple and go for some hearts, because that's what I'm feeling. But it looks like I am going to be bringing this up to a total of 8 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And yeah, I mean, I think that in general, we've got a lot of liquid in here. Some will evaporate as we go. But let's heat this up so we can start layering on our love. I made up my stock solution of Derma Poinsettia Fresh. This was actually the color that I used for Hanukkah and maybe watermelon. At one point I think I said that I thought I used cherry bomb, but no, this was the one I used. And oh, that is good. Oh man, I wasn't sure if I would want to dilute this, and there's still a chance that that might be what I want to do. But oh man, this is fun. Let's add a little there. The thing that I like about layering hearts versus just, let's do one more. And I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. The thing I like about layering hearts versus just doing lines is that it gives a little bit more randomness. They are spaced out more, so you're less likely to have like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines like in a row, and I find it freeing. I can do something similar if I do squiggles, but even if I do a squiggle, I find that there seems to be something parallel about it. And I just have really enjoyed doing it this way. So these colors looks like they're spreading a bit, but I am gonna wait 10 minutes and we'll come back and check in and flip and see how many flips of this we may or may not want to do. It's been 10 minutes and I think that we will potentially see a little bit of, yeah, there's some areas where we may see some spread, but a lot of it is pretty well set. And so some spread is fine. I think we'll still end up with a lot of contrast between our red and the pink base. But ooh, check that out. Just from picking it up, the way that those colors move is so, so fun. I really, really enjoy this technique for, it's funny because it's not that it's like super like speckled or super fine speckles, but it will give a speckled appearance to the finished project, which is awesome. And I'm very grateful that this squeeze bottle is working rather nicely today. These aren't my prettiest hearts, but the love is there. And you know, if you have some drips and stuff, that's fine too. That's fine too. But I always try to infuse love into every project I do. But extra special for Valentine's Day. So I guess now I'll wait 10 minutes and then we'll flip it inside out and probably do one last round. I'm not even going to check. I am going to go ahead and open this up. The goal is that we don't need color to be everywhere on the yarn, but for it to be more balanced, it's worth opening it up a bit to do one more round. Even though this is probably the last round of color I'm adding to this yarn, I'm still gonna wait 10 minutes and move it before we start the final let's set this yarn completely process. Okay, one final check to make sure that I am satisfied. And it does look like we have really, really good coverage. The other thing that taking a look at it right now is doing is moving the yarn just a bit. Moving the yarn, so then like if there's a little bit of undissolved dye, it gives it a chance to move. But I am gonna add more water. And this is just another 6 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to allow things to have access to a bit more movement so we can set it. And so I'm gonna let this heat for 20 minutes. I think that as I start to scale this up and dye more skeins, I may have a dye pot that I put the yarn in for that final 20 minutes to heat, or I might potentially use a steamer basket and steam set it or something. That way I can easily reuse the same dye bath over and over and over again as I do more and more. Because if it gets a little bit too full of water, then the colors will spread more and things will behave a little bit differently. But don't worry, I am going to show you, now that we have our prototype, how this dyes up on the Superwash MCN and our Lurex sparkle yarn. I just turned off the heat and we are going to remove our yarn. Oh, this is so pretty. And let it cool so I can wash it. But now I am curious to know whether this is going to feel like too much liquid to dye our next round. And yes, I think it is a bit too much. So I am going to siphon off some of our liquid so that way we can reduce the water volume but save the liquid to use later on. And I guess I'm not really siphoning, I'm just literally just removing it, but you get the idea. Once I was satisfied with the amount of liquid I had removed, I arranged the yarn in the pan like I did with the Stroll, so that way the lightest areas are showing up first, so that way I can get some coverage, break up some of those lighter patches with our red. And then I turned on the heat to start bringing things up to a light simmer, nice and steamy. And then I started adding on our poinsettia in hearts randomly over this, waiting 10 minutes in between each flip. Maybe there was still a bit more water in here than I had with the original Stroll, but I did see a bit more spread of the red onto the base, which again is not something that I am mad about at all. We still have a lot of contrast and different hues in here. But as I mentioned while working on the prototype, I may end up setting up a steamer basket or something for the final set. That way I can just keep using the same pan and keep that water level low versus removing and adjusting. But I am still very excited with the direction of this colorway. What I can say for certain is with the deep red, the contrast with the silver lurex pops amazingly well. For this case, I did end up just adding that water back in and heating it for 20 minutes. I removed some of the liquid and held it in reserve, and then added the 3 pink skeins of our Superwash Capretta to the pan, started heating things up, and then layering on hearts. Now, the lurex maybe had a tiny bit more spread because there was a little bit more water, but I was ultimately expecting that to behave very similarly to our prototype Stroll. The Capretta, I wasn't sure how much or little spread you would see. I think ultimately it's going to come down to how much water we have in the pan. When I went to flip the Superwash MCN the first time, I did notice that in some areas there was still a little bit of undissolved dye. So I didn't squeeze out the water as I flipped because I didn't want to move around the dye too much. But then, as I did our next iteration, I also added some more of that water with vinegar just around the edge, just to make sure things didn't dry out too much. But again, waiting 10 minutes in between each flip. When I finished with the Superwash MCN, I added a splash of vinegar and a lot more water, and let it heat for 20 minutes before turning off the heat, letting it cool so we can go wash all of the yarn. Let's wash our Valentine's Day yarn, at least our Stroll prototype. I will show probably a time lapse of the washing of the other 2 skeins, especially, well, I'll do a time lapse if I see no bleeding here. If I see bleeding here, then, well, we're gonna have a lot of washing to do. But I think that this is just so fun and bright and a little bit literal when it comes to Valentine's Day, but I haven't gone for literal yet with this. I've tried to do more purple or more deeper saturated tones in the past. So I am very, very excited by this. And I am not seeing any color come out. Did I add soap yet? Let's add soap. I can't remember if I did. I've dyed a lot of yarn today, so I don't know. But I will say that I have not dyed more of the Valentine's Day yarn because I wanted to see how it washed before I moved on. And there is no bleeding. So I'm going to rinse out the soap from this colorway, put it through my spin dryer, and then hang it up to dry. There's always a chance that even if we don't see colors bleed on a Superwash nylon blend, that you could see some bleeding happen on either our sparkle base or the Superwash MCN, just because Different fibers absorb dyes differently, but I really wasn't expecting any because I know I didn't use that much color, but little bits of these two dyes gave us a really lovely punch that I am super, super excited about. This colorway is one of the best for an assembly line of almost any other colorway I've done in a larger batch. Mainly because I have two colors that are striking really, really quickly. So that first kettle dyeing step is not a rate limiting factor that maybe it would have been otherwise. And as I started doing many, many rounds of layering hearts on yarn, having a steamer basket to the side also helped with the rate of production, because instead of waiting 20 to 30 minutes at the end to let the colors set completely, I'm steaming that while I start layering hearts on the next set of yarn. And so this is just working so, so well. And the 10 minutes in between each flip is enough time for me to go and continue working on the Valentine's cards and progress keepers that I am including with these sets. I know a lot of people may not be very into Valentine's Day, but I enjoy any opportunity to share love out into the world. So I really hope that you can feel the positive energy I am pouring into this yarn, whether you have this yarn physically in your possession or you're just watching it on the screen. Please feel it as a huge warm hug, socially distant hug still, from me to all of you. And I really hope that I can make you smile today. Da-da-da-da! Here are 9 of the skeins I dyed up for Valentine's Day. And whoa baby, that's a lot of pink. But let me pull out one of each base so we can talk about them a little bit more individually. Okay, we have our 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon, our Lurex blend, which is 90% Superwash Merino, 10% Lurex, and then our Superwash MCN, which is 80% Superwash Merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon. The first set I dyed was on the Stroll fingering weight yarn, and seeing how quickly that Pink Orchid absorbed, the main shift I made after that prototype was to layer the Pink Orchid on in 2 batches to help us get a little bit more coverage. We still have a very tonal base, which is what I wanted, but I wanted the lightest patches to be more at least pink versus a little bit more white in some areas. And so that was the main reason for doing that shift. The 3 bases look really, really similar, and it does look like that our Lurex blend is a different color. It in a lot of ways looks almost a little bit more muted. Right here on camera from the monitor, it doesn't really look that way. But, and again, I don't know how well this is showing up on camera, but because it looks a little bit different because when you're from far back, you're seeing the average of that silver Lurex in there. If you look at the fiber itself, you do have the same bright pink, but your eye sort of blends that silver in, so that makes it a tiny bit less bright looking. But this base is so much fun, and the Lurex is so shiny and sparkly. The pops of red in this colorway will appear like as a small flecks of red across a predominantly pink landscape. Some of them, depending on what you make, might only show up as 1 stitch, some might show up as a couple, and the placement of it should be really random and fun. I mean, that was the goal of this. I wanted to have a fun colorway that I'm injecting my love into, and maybe a little bit literally with the way I layered the color, but I'm really enjoying this combination of pink and red, and so I hope you like it too. The Superwash MCN and Stroll dyed up pretty similarly. I will say that, I mean, this was a prototype, so I did a difference for the base, but the colors maybe have a little bit more spread with the MCN. It's maybe a little bit sharper with just the merino nylon, but it's really, really, really close. For 2022, I put together a fun Valentine's Day package, and I'm really proud of some of the other things I'm including in this, so I just wanted to share a little bit about it. I made some homemade Valentine's Day cards that I will write little notes in and sign to include with the yarn, which will be wrapped up inside an organza bag, nice and cute. I am not a painter at all, but I had a lot of fun playing with my kids' watercolor paints to paint some cardstock to use for these cards. There's also a fun Valentine's Day progress keeper to go with this project. These are lavender iridescent hearts on a lobster claw, so they can be used with whatever kind of fiber arts you like to do. I always really enjoyed making Valentines and stuff as a kid, and so it's just a lot of fun to be able to send out a fun surprise for people. So if you opened up one of these sets, I hope that it feels like a warm, yarny hug. And if you didn't open a set and you're just watching the video, I hope you feel my virtual hug through the screen as well. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please make sure that you are subscribed, turn on notifications, and follow me on social media. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and you can even follow me on Patreon for free to get notified whenever I have a public post, which I generally do when I have a bigger mystery kind of option like this. Thank you so much for watching.